Um, yeah, great. So what we're going to have to do here is I'll just record it and then subsequently put it onto YouTube. Um, there's still a few people in here, and they're pretty nice people, so they're going to be okay with the fact that this is just bollocksed up. But let me just put something on the actual YouTube itself. Sorry, stream is not working. So sorry. Recording the talks now, and then we'll put it on our page. Yeah, I'm really sorry about that to anyone that sees watching on YouTube. Genuinely, it's been a weird one with takeaways and stuff. But yeah, nonetheless, so thank you everyone that's has attended, and nice to see some people here that have come here before. So this is the third dose or the third installment of Design Truth Live. And if you don't know who I am, and this might be your first occasion on Design Truth Live, normally I've got a better camera and you can actually see my face. But my name's Brad and I am an industrial design recruiter. So I suppose the actual purpose of Design Truth, if you don't actually know, is to keep us all a little bit connected in these weird times. So on this call here, and kind of retrospectively, hopefully on YouTube, there'll be people watching from graduates, agency owners, and to senior designers. What we do is we just come together and we effectively put the world to rights. So we've got a couple of speakers here in Hans and Vish. But before I introduce you to them, I just wanted to take 5 to 10 minutes, and I've already taken 7 minutes of that up, so I'm going to have to make this a bit quicker than normal. But Design Truth has actually, over the last, I think we set this up in March, April time, we've noticed that actually things are actually going pretty well, and people actually like what we do. There's passion behind what we're trying to do. People are actually genuinely invested and interested in it. So for that, thank you. And just to give you some context on numbers, so you might be thinking, well, how many people actually listen to this, or how many people actually watch it? And to be honest with you, I think over the last 90 days, we've had something like 2,000 or something like downloads on this actual thing. So thank you for that. That's generally pretty cool. I see someone clapping there, so thank you for that. Considering we don't actually know how to put a stream together, and this is a very evident example, or barely edit video, then seriously, thank you for that. And because of that, we've got a couple of plans really of what we're going to do for next year, 2021. And there's 3 things I just wanted to kind of share with everyone before I pass you over to Vish. The first kind of main thing is that we're going to kind of freshen up our brand look and actual make us look a little bit more designery. We've had 2 Loughborough design grads that have got in touch, have set up their own business. Ollie and James have set up their own company called the Cardware Shop, and they've kindly said that they would help us in putting a bit of a brand look together. So look forward to seeing what they come up with. The second thing is that actually what we're planning to do is to turn this into more of a physical event. Now we can't do that at the minute because of this thing called COVID, but we're hoping that in 2021, wherever that may be, it may be in April, it may be in December, who knows. But what we're trying to do, or our aspiration is to turn this into a physical event. So people can come together, name a pub in London, and we'll be there. Basically, that is the nuts and bolts of it. So whether people will be speaking or we're just having a general chinwag, that's kind of our aim and aspiration. Whilst we love Zoom and Teams or whatever, I just don't think there's anything that quite beats actually meeting people face to face. I don't know if anyone actually remembers those days, but that's just kind of better, isn't it? So there's that. And third thing, what we're planning to do is we're planning to set up a Design Truth Patreon page. Now that's something that we don't necessarily want people to sign up to if they don't want to, and we're certainly not forcing it upon anyone. But the reason behind why we're trying to do it is because doing all of this stuff is actually pretty super time intensive, and B, we want to actually improve the quality of the output. So that's the first main priority of setting up a Patreon page, is we can do things where we can send cameras, hopefully not Logitech ones after this experience, to our guests, and audio, and making sure everything looks proper. So there's that. The second thing we want to do is we actually want to put things back into industry. One of the reasons why we actually set this thing up is because we were just getting a bit annoyed and a bit frustrated with how. I remember I went traveling, for example, and I came back from Australia and I had the same conversations with people before I left. So they'd moan to me that design education was a bit crap, or they'd moan to me about why are digital people taking up our job titles, product designer? When can we get that back? How can we get that back? All these different things. And I just remember kind of coming away and thinking, Jesus, I had these conversations with people like 3-4 years ago. We're not going to do anything about it. So that's the plan. So that's what we're going to do. I don't know how, but I've started this university roadshow, and I had one this morning, and I've got 4 or 5 booked already this year, where we're just going out to the students and just delivering a message of hopefully just a bit of a dose of reality for them, and just really giving them some insight into the world of work, into the world of industry. But we want to go a little bit deeper than that. We want to hopefully use Patreon funds to say, look, any secondary schools that have had their kind of design technology budget cut for whatever reason, what can we do to help you? How can we help in that? Whether it's a small startup that's looks to need a token of investment, and look, it's not going to be major money by any stretch, but anything we can do to help with, I don't know, they're trying to buy a 3D printer or something like that. What can we do to come together and maybe get them a deal to get their CAD packages a bit cheaper in price? Those kind of things. That's what we're kind of thinking about. And it's a bit frustrating that I can't really kind of share this with you all at the minute, or I'm sharing it with you guys here on the Zoom call, but as you can tell, I'm winging this one with the situation that's happened. So I'm going to shut up basically and pass you over to Vish. And Vish, I can see here, has a camera, he has a shared screen. He was talking to me about speaker notes earlier. So this is a guy that actually knows what he's doing. So I'm going to pass you over to Vish. And what I would hopefully, to those that don't know yet, but if you have any questions for Vish, or you just have any points as he's talking, if you could just put it into the chat function, that would be fantastic. And then after a 20-minute talk from Vish, it's all around about the future of work. And trust me, the future of work is bloody weird, isn't it? What's happening with work right now. So Vish is going to tell us what's going to happen over the next 12, 20, 18, 24 months. We'll crack on from there. So Vish, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to see if this share screen actually works. And I think so, it's that one. Okay. Cool. No one's seen my speaker notes, right? All good? Cool.
Yeah, it's all fine.
Nice. All right, let's move this up. So hi everybody. I'm Vish. I'm a design researcher, and I'm going to be going over some snapshot of my research that I've done over the summer, looking into the future of work and how this relates to you guys, to industrial designers. But first, I'm just going to give a quick introduction of myself and what I do. So I've had many different roles in the design industry over the past 5 years. So industrial designer, design manager, graphic designer, and now a design researcher. I work at a tech startup called Klydo. So we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to develop the world's first creative AI for innovation. So essentially that means just extracting data from people's digital footprint online, understanding the patterns, behaviors, and motivations of that behaviors, and then of those consumers, and then using that to accelerate innovation in organizations. So essentially, how can you innovate using data? I'm also an innovator, so I'm not only trying to understand the world around me, but using what I learn as a researcher to create new things that deliver real value to people. And it's kind of having a mindset that is an end-to-end perspective on design and innovation. So all the way from research, how can you take an insight and take that all the way through to a product that delivers real value for people. So that's basically, in terms of innovation, what this means now in terms of like today, but it also what that means in the future. So I'm also a futures blogger. So I blog on the future of things. So like work or design, transport or healthcare. And I do that on Medium and hopefully soon on Forbes as well. So that's just a really quick introduction to me. I am going to kick off with what you're all here for, which is what's the future of industrial design. So I'm going to be talking about a few excerpts from some research that I've been doing into the future of work and how sort of big structural changes in our economy, in our society will shape your job roles over the next 20 years. So this is going to cover two broad drivers: the future of work, so how the nature of work is changing, and it's changed quite a lot over the last year, and future consumers, so how are our customers and our interactions with our customers changing as well. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this guy, good old Henry Ford. This is actually one of my favorite quotes from him that kind of captures the reason why I decided to do this research. So the world around us is always sort of changing, and it's very easy to get comfortable in what we know and how we do things. But if we stay still, we're at risk of becoming irrelevant. So to make a controversial statement, there's a certain exceptionalism amongst designers that because we effectively own a process that the world is still transitioning to, and that's design thinking, that we don't need to look at our own house to see how the outside world is kind of shaping us. So we're also working in a very similar ways to kind of our design forefathers of 30 years ago. So the work might have migrated online and we're not using sheets and sheets of paper anymore, but working patterns, working styles, and fundamentally what we work on, the actual products, hasn't really shifted that much in 30 years. So the question is, what is this change and how is it going to affect us as industrial designers and designers? So let's kick off by understanding some broad themes in the future of work. So there's been a lot of change in the future of work this year, and out of this disruption, we're beginning to see sort of new behaviors transitioning into long-term structural changes. So you can essentially think about it as the foundations of work that is actually moving. So the first of these changes is untethered working. So how work is becoming untethered from location and how you can work effectively from anywhere. And the second is digital migration. So how the way we do our work is becoming increasingly digital first. And the third is ultra fluid labor market. So how many people how many jobs people will have not only across their lifetime, but also at the same time. So it's about having multiple jobs at the same time. So let's go more detail within these broad future of work changes. So untethered working. COVID has really redefined how we interact with work, and it's kind of not going to go back like ever. The distribution of workforces, sort of, having everyone scattered across the country, it's going to be the new norm in some part. Some jobs will require different levels of co-location, and the change is primarily going to be people-driven. So it's going to be up to you to decide how often you want to go to the office or work from home. But effectively, it means you'll be able to live and work in two places and do your job effectively. So that's the real core point, is the fact that we've always been able to do jobs in two different locations or more, but now we're actually getting to the point where we can do it effectively across different businesses. So what are the impacts of this? Well, some of it's still up in the air. In theory, you can live and work in two separate places, but the place aspect of that becomes sort of open for interpretation. So historically, when barriers of work have fallen, companies usually pile in so that they do their businesses more productively or efficiently. In previous cases, these barriers have been physical, so like opening up a new labor markets in Eastern Europe or in Asia. And then the difference now is that it's a digital barrier that's been taken down. Anyone can work from anywhere. And this opens up a really key debate around another wave of globalization. So where you're effectively no longer competing with people you graduated with or that you share a nationality with, but you really are competing on a global stage. So for employees, I guess, in Western countries like the UK, the big question now will be sort of how is this untethering of work and location going to affect my pay packet? Do I need a London wage if I live in the Midlands? What is the value of my job if it can be done just as well by someone else in another country for less? So it has some real ramifications on pay. The next big change is digital migration, and in large part, it's kind of already happened. So in order to facilitate the pivot to home working, companies and individuals have invested in back-end and front-end systems and processes to make their work easy to do from home. So the unintended consequence of this is that in the process of digitalizing work, we've also made it super slick. Companies, in a large part, have automated large chunks of their internal process, like HR and project management. This is a trend that's been going on for a couple of years now. stuff that used to take ages to do with a whole army of people is now just being done by a back-end system like Charlie HR. So we're also using digital tools on top of this to augment ourselves for effective remote collaboration, for feedback and asynchronous styles of working. However, we're still in the transition phase of all this, so we're still learning how to interact with these new processes and systems, but the only way is up. The more ingrained automation and digitalization becomes in business, the more slick and productive our work will effectively be. So where we'll eventually get to is this sort of future of automated businesses where you can set something up and have all the pesky back-end processes that take forever to get through, so like invoicing, filing, accounting, scaling, managing people. Either that all becomes automatic, or it becomes self-serve, or it's driven by this mix of sort of human AI systems, where less people is needed to kind of deliver on a service, an internal service. So we're really beginning this journey with tools like Slack and Zapier, and like Charlie HR and Xero. But what's interesting is going to see how those tools evolve to help us do business much more efficiently. And the third future of work trend, so ultra fluid labor. So I guess who has a hobby here, and then who has a hobby they've turned into a business or a part-time gig? So quite a lot of people, I'd imagine. So what's interesting is we're on one of those right now. So Design Truth is a podcast, is a product of a new wave of entrepreneurialism that's being driven by two things. So one is COVID and the free time we kind of now have to follow our passions, and also a broader reassessment of like our 9-to-5 jobs in our careers. So do we actually want to be doing this? Do we actually want to be spending so much time on our 9-to-5 when we have other interests outside of that? So I think the more you push for sort of like flexible working and for work-life balance, the more we'll go down this route of sort of entrepreneurialism. So I think that the idea is that you may not be a designer in the future, but you could be lots of different things essentially, based on what your hobby is or what your interests are outside of design. The other side of the penny is that we're also freelancing more. So before the pandemic, and this hasn't really changed that much, it's kind of projected that 50% of all UK workers will be freelancing by 2030. So that's a lot of workers who are going to be, not self-employed, not employed or not part-time employed, but self-employed. So more of us want to experience our jobs in sort of different contexts and environments, and that's really driving this shift towards freelancing. Younger workers especially sort of are much more open to switching to job roles more frequently, so it's more prevalent within them. But what this means essentially for sort of your day-to-day work, I guess, as workplace turnover increases, you may only be working with your colleagues for like a few weeks or on a project-to-project basis, and this may change for every single project. So I guess if you're in a consultancy, you're probably used to this already in some degree. If you're in-house, this might be a bit more new for you. I think the knock-on effect, and kind of Brad can listen up to this bit, is that talent acquisition will become super easy. So people aren't going to be tethered to a certain employer or a certain business. They're going to be much more freely able to move around and want to move around to different businesses to do really good, high quality work. But the converse of that is that talent retention could actually become super tricky and almost impossible. So that's a snapshot of the future of work. I'm also going to cover the future consumers and how they're going to change and how we're going to be interacting with them a bit differently. So there are quite a few trends in this space, but I'm just going to focus on two sort of super salient examples. So one is localism. So how COVID and sort of other massive macro forces are causing a shift back to local products and services. And insights to data. So new technologies are opening up novel ways of interacting with our users and sort of capturing their behaviors in real life contexts that are proving superior to like traditional ethnographic methods. So with localism, more of us are buying from Amazon, but there's been an equal rise in consumers looking to support their local businesses during and beyond lockdowns. This is kind of a sign of much broader movement that anti-globalization forces are driving this whole anti-China, Brexit, made in America, made in Britain, and sort of the negative effects of that global trade has had over the past 20 years. All these are kind of driving consumers back to goods and services that are produced or delivered locally. And they're doing this because these products are familiar. They're really high quality, but fundamentally they're more bespoke. So they're not mass manufactured, they're personalized, they're one of a kind or batch produced. So effectively their products that feel more connected to users. So this trend kind of started in the food and beverage industry, but it's now moving towards home goods. It could go further and kind of penetrate into more traditional ID domains like consumer electronics or industrial goods or healthcare products. We're already seeing a huge trend towards like personalization and anti-consumerism with companies like Etsy and Not Another Bill. So it could go down that route as well. So I think if this happens, there will be some fundamental implications for industrial designers if products become more bespoke and made more locally. So it's affecting that industrial aspect of industrial design. And so the second consumer insight is really kind of the holy grail of innovation and kind of insight-led product development. So, you know, when you talk to real users in a qualitative context, there's always going to be an element of not uncovering real world behaviors or motivations. So if we start to use data, we can see beyond what people show us and think their behaviors are to begin to interpret their real world behaviors and interactions with our products and services. So it's quite fundamental in that sometimes people don't even know what their actual behaviors are when interacting with things. So we can bypass that and look at the data to understand what that is and what those behaviors and motivations are. So the result of this sort of data-driven approach is that innovation effectively is going to get sped up. So lead times for projects are going to shrink if insight discovery or insight validation only takes a couple of hours or days, and now it takes weeks or months. So I think industrial designers need to take that seriously. So you could be interacting with very different types of researchers in the future, ones that are hybrid, qualitative and quantitative, but also ones that are more anchored in data that's been extracted using AI or ML methods, machine learning methods. So they're the external trends that are shaping design. I've kind of put together a few teasers on how the world of ID could look in the next 10 years based on those trends. It's a bit speculative, but the key is that the foundation is in sort of real research by talking to real people. And I'm going to kind of cover this a bit more in a Medium article that kind of is going to come out in the next couple of weeks. So if you wanted to know a bit more about this. So the first of these futures is this idea of selectivism and a hybrid designer. So essentially, we're going to have more freelancers. We're going to have this new digitally enabled global workforce and more of us splitting our time between our hobbies and our work. And all this is effectively going to lead to a world of skills-based jobs. So it's not going to be about the type of work that you do. It's going to be the type of skills that you have and how you can effectively apply those skills over different disciplines. So skills will define what you do and how much you get paid. And the key is that those skill sets are going to sit across several disciplines. They're not just going to sit across one. So essentially, you won't have many generalists or specialists anymore. You'll have a collection of designers that are proficient in divergent skill sets, so hybrid designers. And to take sort of an example of this, let's take that data-driven research and insight discovery as an example. So in this reality of a designer who needs to understand and extrapolate data that's been sourced through AI methods, or quantitative AI methods. They'll have a full skills-based industrial design, but in a similar way, how designers now bleed over to sort of design research or UX research. They too may also want to supplement that ID skills with machine learning skills, for instance, to get the best understanding of that AI-driven data, or maybe even to design ways in which to extrapolate that data in more proficient ways. So there's an example of how we can all become hybrid designers. And it doesn't necessarily have to be within a tech angle. It could always be hybrid designers who are a bit like me, actually. So who look towards innovation, but also design research, and then mixing skill sets across existing types of job roles and disciplines. The other future is this idea of integration and not innovation. So if we forget about innovation for a second, the new kind of buzzwords are going to be speed, efficiency, sort of intelligence. These are going to be the new buzzwords that are going to replace innovation. And that's because we're in an age now that is defined by sort of how well you can innovate and how well you can solve problems. This won't last forever at its current pace. Eventually, the rate of innovation does decrease as societies move out of the technological conveyor belt that underpins its trajectory. We're in the middle of this thing called Industry 4.0. So all these tech, all this tech that I'm talking about AI and machine learning, that's Industry 4.0. And we're already seeing tech that kind of like thinks for itself. And very soon we'll be able to see tech that actually problem solves by itself. So that has really fundamental implications. So when this inflection point is reached, when things can start to problem solve by itself, and that's sooner than you think it's going to be, industrial design will stop being about solving problems, and it'll be more about integrating problem-solving technology. So making it run effectively, making sure the product characteristics aid in that process. So the design of the future will be focusing on integrating new tech and more than innovating new ways of solving problem solving. And then the last one is kind of taking this industrial aspect out of design. So there are implications about this whole pivot back to local goods and services, or the pivot towards hyper-personalization. So either way, the mass manufacture model of so many products is kind of becoming threatened almost, or becoming a bit obsolete. So this won't apply to all products. You can still imagine having an iPhone that's the same as your mate's. It's going to be mass manufactured, but it doesn't need to, this shift doesn't need to happen completely to make an impact. Even if it's just 20% of products, that's going to be enough to cause large fluctuations in the design industry and the way that we do design. And another perspective is going back to all this new tech and Industry 4.0. So, but this time we're looking at the back end. So like we're getting really good at developing new methods for making things. And as we do, the trend is that they're really going to become self-serve. So a bit like 3D printing, where effectively you're having this completely different approach to manufacturing a product, where you don't necessarily need tools, and you don't necessarily have to have a factory to do it. Or human machine hybrids, where the human doesn't have to completely manually design the parameters for manufacture. So you don't have to do all of the complex tooling. You're actually going to be augmented by tech, by AI systems that can help you to do that more efficiently and quickly. So these two things will cause designers to shift out of designing for manufacture and into new skills, or they could be doubling down into design itself. So that's an overview of the research. It's sort of like a super high level. I thought there's a lot to digest, so like do ask as many questions as you want, and kind of I can talk around some more points.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Vish. Thought-provoking as ever. If you liked what Vish was talking about, Vish actually appeared on our podcast back in the days before we had, I think we had funky music back then. He was quite an early guest on our podcast, so talks a lot about the future of work there. Now, let's just see if you've got any questions for you, Vish. So Hans here says, when you refer to hybrid designers, do you mean if someone is good at CAD, their skills can be utilised in other disciplines, let's say architecture or interior design as an example?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually, because I think the idea, the example that I gave was kind of like a really future-y example of like how you can mix, really divergent fields to get these different types of designers that we could have in the future. So I think it's a bit of a spectrum. So you can go all the way like from one industry to the next, but at the same time you can look at adjacent jobs. So yeah, like effectively, if you're good at CAD, then there's lots of crossover as a skill set that you can really easily apply to architecture or to any other type of job that requires CAD-based skills.
Yeah, cool. Connor said he did his recent dissertation on how creative AI would affect the role of an industrial designer, and he believes that AI will always be a tool, stroke extension of a designer during the process. You're nodding, so I'm guessing you're going to agree with that.
Yeah, it's kind of a battle that I've had myself as well, like with joining Klydo, because it's interesting, like how much are we going to replace the value of having a human mind on something versus like how much are we going to augment that experience? So I think in some ways there are some really salient examples of how AI is going to replace some of the stuff that we do. So especially towards that manufacturing side, and especially towards like insights discovery, ultimately if it's going to be quicker or more efficient to just go down an AI route, for something to almost snap its fingers and know how to design a certain tool or how to extract insights from 60,000 reviews. That's always going to be the business case, that they're always going to go for agility. But what we want to get to is to make sure that we're augmenting human experiences, so they're not getting taken over by this tech. We're more working with the tech to implement change.
Yeah, cool. There's a couple of points here. Win and Hannah's put, this is so interesting. What time frame are we talking? And Win said something similar. What are the timescales of these 4 sites? And is there a report or a paper available with some context of this info?
Yeah, sure. So I think the timeframes are sort of looking at a broader, it's not horizon, it's more like 10 years out. We're at a point at the moment with all this technology, especially, and some of these trends that are coming out of COVID, that they haven't actually got out the gate just yet. They're still quite early phase. But what I'm doing is kind of reading early behaviors and early trends to kind of see where they could go to. So this is one aspect of the future that we can get to. But yeah, ultimately we're looking at 10 years, so anything can happen. But this is one aspect of what could happen. I think, to Wynn's point about any additional research, it is bespoke research, so I'm going to be doing my own sort of Medium article series on it. So yeah, I'll share the link to that so you can have a look.
Cool. How did you see the data-driven mindset integrate into traditional ID workflow? And that's from Advate. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, so that's quite interesting. So it's kind of, I think it's going to be about insight discovery, essentially, with this data-driven mindset. So it's like, if you're mining, at the moment we're doing insight discovery through talking to people. We're doing ethnographic research where we're either doing it with a bunch of people or we're doing it one-on-one, or we're doing co-creation where they lead the process, right? And it's interesting because you can only get to the root of an actual behavior by sort of continually engaging with them. Like, I think there's an aspect of when we use a product or service that we think we use it in a certain way, or we like to think that we use it in a certain way, or we like to present that we're using it in a certain way. And I think unless you're able to capture what people are actually using in a context where they don't really know, or that they're not thinking about it, then you start to get real behaviors. So I think if we shift towards this sort of data-driven mindset of collecting insights where you're looking at digital footprints, people online, you're tracking behaviors in that way, in an ethical way, I have to add, then you're going to get to the root cause of the behavior. You're going to get a root cause of how someone's using something and why. So I think to that point, in terms of ID workflow, you're going to get a really agile method of uncovering insights and how that feeds into insight-led product development.
Yeah, cool. We've got quite a few questions here, Vish. I'll try and, if we go through these questions now, so Hans, you might have to wait a little bit longer because there seems to be quite a few questions here. So Richard here, he said, are we going to a situation comparable to the Middle Ages where designers are like the local blacksmith, the person that can build everything for everybody in the village?
I mean, I think when we talk about hybrid designers, it's not that you're going to have one person's going to have multiple skill sets. I think it's going to be up to you to develop what type of skill set you want. If you want to be this data design hybrid, or your passion might be in baking, so you could be like a baker designer hybrid. It's kind of like, it doesn't have to always be like context specific with your job. It can be different things. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, and Sebastian said, based on your research, how do you imagine teamwork in the digitalized world? And I suppose we're starting to experience that, aren't we? Which is mixed results, I'll be honest, in terms of how it's going. So how have you found it anyway? You're not going into the office, so from your own personal standpoint, how are you finding working in the digitalized world?
I think it's interesting because I started a new job in the middle of a lockdown, so at the start of a lockdown, and I think my work's been quite good in terms of like capturing feedback on remote hires. It's going to be quite interesting. It's kind of like you miss a lot of well, from my perspective, you miss a lot of the good and the bad distractions that you have. So all these, going out for a drink or just having little conversations with people who you work with. Those are good distractions, but also bad distractions of, procrastination or whatever else at work, or going out for lunch and spending a bit longer. So I think the effect of that is that you get super into your work and you get super like focused on what you're doing. So like it's taken me 2 weeks to catch up and kind of fully onboard myself in a contextual setting that I thought was going to take 2 months. So I think that's tricky. I think ultimately working in teams is just going to be based on what people actually think work and don't work. Like if you prefer working and communicating remotely, then that's great. But ultimately that's never going to replace what collaborating with people face to face. There's a certain energy that comes from that. So it's always up to the individual.
Yeah, we started an industry survey, Vish, that you would have filled out yourself. And the topic around remote working has been a really mixed bag. You can talk to one person and the next person will just give a completely different take on it. Some love it, some hate it. But it really comes on nicely to Olive's question here about with greater remote working, how does collaboration change? She can see VR really helping with physical prototyping. It's already happening. I speak to clients and they're strapping themselves into VR headsets. So is it Fusion 360? It's already here. That's not the future. It's already here, and that may just be a little bit more commonplace. Let's fast forward just a year or two, but I think it's already here. I don't know what you think, Vish, but
yeah, I think it's the start of our interactions with these things. So it's like we're still trying to figure out how to use them in our workflows, like effectively, without it just being like more of a hindrance. I think what we'll get to is where we can like effectively integrate like this stuff like VR or different ways of doing remote collaboration where it feels more natural. But that's quite a while off. Yeah, I think that's one to experiment.
Yeah, and if that topic is of interest to you, Olive, then I'd hate to give the podcast a plug, but we had a chap on called Guy Newsome, he's a design director of a company that is effectively trying to build buildings through holograms and massively using VR in the design process. So if that's a topic that's of interest to you, then scroll back and have a listen to Guy. He talks a lot about VR and how he's using it in what they're doing. And finally, Julian has put so much of an insight in industrial design comes down to empathy and gauging human responses. How do you see AI tools evolving around this and not just data?
This is really, I think this is the key sticking point for using AI in this insight discovery, because in some way you can drill down to some level of empathy by reading someone's review on a particular product or a Facebook post that's been posted in a group of a particular subject. I think you can drill down into a level of empathy, but ultimately I think that's the key point. Like I don't necessarily have an answer to that, because that's the stumbling block of AI right now. It's kind of like, how do you get past this need to talk to people, to understand their motivations and their behaviors, and to empathize with them, and to pose them questions and then see how they answer those questions and kind of gauge your response by that. It is. I have an answer for that, because that's the stumbling block at the moment.
Well, so I hope if there's someone else out there, Vish, that will have the answer to it. Finally, Sebastian's here. What do you think is going to be the relevance of physical product design? And anyone that puts it into Google will certainly be or LinkedIn jobs, they'll certainly be asking that question. So what's the relevance of, we're still going to need hardware, aren't we? We're still going to need physical products. That's not going away.
I think, yeah, I mean, we're always going to have physical things that we interact with in the world. It just means it's less about, designing the form and function based on, CNF and stuff, because all of that stuff's sort of migrating to the digital world. Like you can start to see now lots of our products becoming very, very similar externally. You can see like devices for the home, all these new products for the home, like Google Home or Amazon Alexa or Apple. They all have an aesthetic that's kind of now based on trends, like home trends. Whereas other stuff that we use, like phones and stuff and laptops, they're all becoming very similar in shape and size, and there's only nuance of materials or nuance of brand that's associated. So I think those are the future relevance of physical product design. So brands and how products are being defined by trends and that are crossing over from other parts of our context.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever read the book Invisible Women. I've got it behind me here, Caroline Criado, and it's interesting to talk about physical product design. And I'm going a little bit off topic here, but she gave this great example of mobile phones and how they're always just effectively designed for men. And I'm pretty sure if you look at the new iPhone 12, there's a couple of new designs, and one of them in particular is a little bit more suited for women. The hand of a woman is generally, on average, a lot smaller than a man. So these iPhones are massive. So probably there's issue there. But again, do you think there may be a bit more? Just ask. This might be a really stupid question, but do you see more products designed in a way where maybe they'll keep other minorities, and they're going to be more in people's minds? And maybe that comes down to, and you talk about this on the pod, but actual design teams themselves starting to be a little bit more diverse. And now there's a little bit more diversity in design team. We're starting to see end implications on, or impact on the product itself. I know we've already spoken about this, but do you think that's the case?
I think it's really interesting because that's sort of like a thing that we haven't discussed here, which is actually really interesting in terms of like inclusive design is kind of broad, a really super broad term now in terms of like how it incorporates diversity, how it incorporates, all these new markets that have opened up over the past 20 years. And you can start to see the cultural impacts of those markets in terms of like China, in terms of Asia, in terms of India, in terms of Africa. And I think now that we kind of know that the consumers within these markets are fundamentally different than what we define as a consumer in the Western world, we're going to start to see that implicate itself on product development and software development. It's kind of like not everybody has the same approach to using a product, or approach for even like the minutiae of like a material. Some cultures might find some materials bad luck, or they might be culturally sensitive. So it kind of opens up this possibility of how can you design a product for all these different markets and for these different consumers. And that's kind of an aspect of that personalization that I was talking about. It's not about designing products on a mass manufacture level that fits everybody and every overarching need. It's more about what are people's specific contextual and sort of design semiotic needs, their cultural requirements, and how can we design products to that.
Good, brilliant. Well, cheers for that, Vish, and thanks for speaking. You've been a listener on the first two, and now you're a kind of a host. So you've done the rounds now, Vish. So thanks for sticking around. Hans, over to you.
Cool. I'll just open up my presentation. I'm gonna have to say the classic COVID line of, "Can you see my screen?"
Not at the minute.
Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, thanks for that, Vish. What I would say, and this has happened in a couple of other podcasts, if you people are quite nice, aren't they? So if you have a question that comes to your mind tomorrow or whatever, then do reach out to Hans or Vish, and they will most likely come back to you and we'll answer you. And I was speaking to other people that we've had on that have spoken in the past, and they get lots of messages that come through. And if you seriously don't feel afraid just to drop them a message on LinkedIn or Instagram, something, they will get back to you with answers to your question if you want something in a little bit more detail. But Hans, I'll pass it over to you.
Cool. Cheers, bro. So I'm Hans Ramzan, an industrial designer, and I have been in the industry for around 8-ish years. And this presentation is kind of an introduction. I'm going to start with like an introduction to who I am and my past experiences, and then talk about how they differ with my current experience of working in a small agency. So I've actually started in the industry as a furniture designer, so I use transferable skills from industrial design. And I've worked with a few different companies, and my first job was designing seating for a lot of London theatres, which is really great when you're walking down the West End and you can kind of pick out different places that you've that you've designed for. And this company was around 20 to 30 employees. So it had the office staff, the designers and things like that, but it also had lots of woodworkers and joiners who made all the furniture that we designed. So it wasn't actually outsourced. And shortly after that, I moved into high-end bespoke furniture design. And this kind of focused a lot on very small details. And again, that's another really great transferable thing that I brought into industrial design. And again, this was a 20 to 30 kind of employee setup in a similar way to the previous company. Now, in between these jobs, I got the opportunity to work on personal projects, primarily consumer electronic, as I wanted to get into the consumer electronic kind of industrial design industry. And with these kind of side projects I was working on, I was lucky enough to have exhibited at loads of different events kind of around the world. So I got to go to London Design Fair, have my work in the Design Museum, and it's really, it felt really grateful to have these opportunities and be recognized for lots of different awards and have my work recognized by all sorts of news bodies. So I now work for a company called Luma-ID, and it's a design agency based in London. And we take on a wide variety of different projects. So we work on things that are consumer electronic, but also things such as medical and medtech, and that's what we want to move more towards. And unlike the other companies I've worked for, this one has a core team of five people in the studio. And we'll occasionally get the freelancer to help out with bits and pieces. The kind of setup of Luma-ID is very collaborative in that we're quite a tight-knit team, and we all like to bounce ideas off each other, but also very independent in the sense that we get our own projects to kind of look after. And it's a client-facing role, so we all individually deal often with our own clients. And I'm lucky enough to have the best boss in the world. I'm not looking for a pay rise, Mark. So how I ended up here was I freelanced for half a year whilst working as a furniture designer at my previous company. And I guess that's kind of the first kind of nugget of what it's like working for a smaller place, where they were able to have me freelancing in the weekends because the systems were a bit more free-flowing and they could adapt to this way of working. So I freelanced for Luma for around half a year, and then I came on board full-time. The first big project I worked on, I was really thrown in at the deep end. Now, this project is under kind of a light NDA still, so I can't speak too much about what the product does and the USPs of it, but it's essentially a baby toy that plays music. And coming from a furniture design background, this picture in general is quite daunting because I didn't have much experience with electronic housing. So I took this entire project from concept ideation to final prototype, and all of it was done in-house with our freelance electronics engineers. And again, this is something that's really great with a small agency, because you're able to get quite a lot of help from your colleagues who have experience with this, and you're not expected to know everything, and everyone's constantly learning. So this is one of the current projects I'm working on, and again, it's under a bit of an NDA, and it's a ring box that essentially records proposals, and there's other products like this out there as well, so I can't really highlight the USP of what makes this different, but again, things like the internals of this, something I'd never had experience of before, such as the flexible PCB inside a tiny box, and this project has encountered numerous problems due to the size of this box, and this is what the client's after, and he wants a tiny box, which is great because we're able to deal with these problems, and it's something where I personally like learning about how to solve these problems. So if something comes up again next time, we're able to rectify that. And again, it's an entire project from start to finish, including everything such as the CMF as well, and really a great kind of all-round project. So as I said before, there's 4 of us working at the moment, and obviously we're all working from home during COVID. So it's great trying to, you know, get everyone involved in Zoom conversations every now and again. And this is actually a bit of a posy photo. We were actually in Develop 3D magazine this week, so this is the one we used. And I'm not sure if you noticed from this Design Truth chat, but I actually do this quite a lot in any Zoom conversation I have. So I have just stolen Brad's background, and I don't know if you can notice there, but I've replaced Berbatov with Beckham. And I don't know why I'm such an idiot, but I just like doing things like that. So as I said, we are all working from home at the moment, but because I live so close to the studio and no one else is in there, I often like to go in, as it's easier to use the workshop and prototype. And I think that's one of the benefits of living so close, and having the access to the studio whenever we want to work. So to the main part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of working at a larger or smaller studio, and I've tried to keep it as fair and unbiased as I can. So I've got perspectives from other people who also work for smaller or larger studios, and also have looked at my previous experience as well and tried to use that as a comparative. Keep in mind, this is mainly my personal view, so there's some things on here where a benefit to me might be a disadvantage to someone else. So the first thing is, with larger studios, you obviously have larger budgets and therefore larger projects. And this is primarily due to the capacity, and you're able to allocate more resources to a project. Another thing is, with larger projects, the larger studios have built up a reputation of the time. So companies are a bit more trusting towards larger studios because of this reputation. One thing that stood out to me when working in a smaller studio, which you don't necessarily get the luxury of in comparison to a larger studio, is things such as ordering multiple parts as backups. So say if we've got a project at a smaller studio, you're not always able to order multiple parts because financially it just doesn't seem viable. Whereas previously, if at larger studios, you would, you know, without a second thought, order multiple parts and have backups, because it's more important to not waste time if the first thing you order comes back wrong. So you'd rather have a backup. And finally, with larger projects, you just have more time to work on projects. Now, this is a bit of a personal one, and it depends what type of designer you are, I guess. So there are some designers who like having more time on projects, and there are some that prefer variety of projects. And this is something that you get with smaller studios. So with Luma-ID, for example, I talked about how we have quite a vast range of different projects that we work on. So one day we'll be working on board games, then bike lights, then medical devices. So the project turnover is a lot quicker with a smaller agency or studio. The benefit of working for a larger studio is bigger clients, and this goes hand in hand with larger projects. So you get the more impressive names, and this is great for putting on your CV and portfolio. However, I've noticed, and people I've spoken with have noticed, that the larger clients are not always the most exciting projects, because you don't necessarily always get free design reign on the types of projects you want, and usually they would have a team of creators that have already mapped out what they want you to do, and all you're doing is pressing the button on all of their ideas. But the good thing about a bigger clients is usually it's a relatable brand, so it's something that if it's a brand you feel passionate about, you can kind of, you know, pour your heart into exactly what the brand is after, and you know exactly what the brand is after. So with smaller clients, for example, when you're dealing with smaller clients, I'm sure if there's any people on this Design Truth Zoom chat now who have dealt with invoicing, they will probably tell you as well as I that invoicing when dealing with larger clients is a lot more difficult, because you've got a lot of hoops to jump through and there's more of a hierarchy. So the decision making is a lot slower with larger clients, whereas in a smaller company and smaller clients, the invoicing is almost immediate, so it's done within a day or two generally. Also, this goes hand in hand with design changes. So I could send an email to a private client rather than a B2B, a business, and expect an email back within the same day or within the following day, rather than having to wait a week. And therefore, you get quicker sign off on a lot of your work. Now, this is quite a big one. With larger companies, I feel that there's more chance of career progression. So you would have junior designers, midweight, senior, director, and those type of titles. So you get more official recognition. And obviously the salary is reflected and the benefits packages are reflected by these titles. Whereas in smaller agencies, there's more of a blurred line between the different titles. And again, this can work to an advantage. For example, at Luma, one thing that our boss keeps mentioning is that with our team, there's no ego. So I'm happy to ask someone to ask my advice, and we're all kind of, you know, here to help each other out, and that's a really nice positive, I guess, of the smaller agencies. With the smaller agencies also, you get more responsibility. So as I was saying at the start, you take on entire projects and you're not almost just like a cog in a wheel. And also as an addition to this, you feel more valued and more appreciated, because you feel like your director can rely on you a lot more. And that's definitely a positive. With the larger companies, they generally tend to have dedicated training programs. So for example, at my last company, they had official, like on-the-job training almost, but also they trained us up on certain software. So we would go away for a few days to a different city and go on a course for a new type of software that they wanted to introduce to the company. There's also company system policies, which are a bit more thorough, and also this teaches a more streamlined process to the company itself. Another thing is having IT support at disposal. So if something goes wrong, you can call IT and they'll fix it straight away. In comparison to this, this could go either way. I think with smaller companies, especially early on, for people who have just been introduced into the industry, it teaches you to be self-managed, and it's really great. So it sets you up for later, for example, if you want to open your own studio or something like that, because there's active learning and you learn the holistic process of what it's like to work in a design studio. and it's not just certain tasks that you're being allocated, which is great. And it also means there's no micromanaging, because there's a lot of trust for your director to know, okay, this guy has an entire project, so I'm going to trust that he's going to take it on correctly and make the client happy. And I think that's very, very important, and very, very, very good for the smaller companies, especially because things like when I brought up previously about having IT at your disposal, one thing that you don't realize when working at a smaller company is all the kind of side tasks that you get assigned. So for example, if a 3D printer breaks or your computer breaks, you don't have the luxury of IT, so you have to teach yourself this stuff. And it's for someone like me who likes to constantly learn and not have stuff done for them all the time, it's very, very good to constantly learn about that. Now, this is quite a big one for the larger companies, and personally for me, I like to kind of travel a lot when I can. So with larger companies, they sometimes have international offices, or you have client meetings abroad or supplier meetings abroad. And this is great for a change of scenery. And if you also like to travel, it's great to, I guess, work in a larger company to have these opportunities. However, in a smaller company, during COVID especially, it's a lot easier to manage remote working, I've found. And part of this is to do with the video conferences that we have, so the Zoom calls. And because there's less people to make time slots for, it's a lot easier to arrange a meeting. You can do it, you can say to someone, oh, are you free in 10 minutes, or are you free in an hour? And you can get the whole team on, and there's less people to rely on to be free at a certain time. Also, one thing that is very important is it sounds like a small thing, but I think it's quite a big thing, in that there's less people interrupting. So at Luma-ID, for example, there's only generally 4 of us on a call at the same time, and none of us have to mute our mics, and we can have a conversation because there's less people to kind of go through in order to get a conversation. Whereas other things, for example, this call, a lot of people have their mics on mute or something like that, because it's a lot harder to manage video conferencing. I also feel like the team dynamic isn't as affected as much as it would be. So my friends who are currently working remotely in larger companies, they're saying that they're having to break their teams down into smaller groups when they video conference because the teams are too big. And this takes away from the idea that when you're in the studio all together, it's very easy to turn around and have a chat with someone, or say, hi, what do you think of this? And you've got access to all of these people. Whereas in a larger company and you're remote working, if the teams are broken down even smaller into teams of 7, 8 people max, you're not going to have access to everyone you previously had access to. This kind of brings me to my next point about having a larger social pool. And in larger companies, you would obviously have a larger social pool and more access to different people. So you increase the chances of talking or getting to know people you like. Whereas in a smaller team, you're kind of stuck with the people that are in that team. And luckily for me, Luma, the team at Luma, we all get on very well. At least I hope that's how the others feel. You also get larger social events, I've found, in bigger companies, because they obviously have the budget to do so. So you'd have company retreats, and sometimes they're in different countries. So that's definitely a positive for larger companies. However, with the smaller companies, you don't have as much office politics. Obviously, you're closer with fewer people, people are more approachable, so you get less hearsay. And if you have a problem with someone, you can go direct. And it seems that with larger companies, there's kind of cliques of different friendship groups. So obviously when you introduce cliques, there's going to be competition, and people are constantly, I mean, just as humans, constantly trying to prove that their clique's better than the other. So you don't get that with smaller companies because everything's a lot more direct. And my favorite slide of all, throwback to the 90s. Thank you for listening. Brad and the other guys at Design Truth, as always, thanks for setting that up. Yeah, I found a word art generator online and I just couldn't resist.
Okay, is that our new logo, is it? Jesus.
Yeah, I've been working on it for a while.
And that's what happens if you if I had to do a presentation. But yeah, cheers for that, Hans. I do really appreciate that.
Cool,
I don't know if anyone's got any questions at all. It's really interesting in kind of hearing your perspective, because I suppose in the job that I do, I mean, I've worked with super huge companies and companies where there's not many people, and I suppose I see things from a slightly different lens. But I think on the whole you've probably been pretty spot on. But I've found that there can be office politics in a team of two just as much as there can be. I think a lot of it comes down to the actual people, rather than necessarily the large or small. And I find some days, Hans, is that, and maybe one day if you ever work in an in-house environment, that actually we often kind of do this thing where we compare in-house and we compare agency, and we kind of split them into two. But actually, I think it's a far more nuanced conversation than that. Anyone have any observations? There'll be some people here that are working in small agencies or larger agencies, people that have done it in the past. Any insights that you can give on your experiences within that? And maybe, as Vish touched on earlier, a lot of people that are going freelance, setting up for themselves, they're going to be small studios. So I don't know if anyone's got any insight into that at all.
I can see Vish said his experience is that you learn quicker and broader with a smaller company, and with large companies you learn deeper. What do you think? I think that's quite an interesting point, especially with smaller companies. You do definitely learn quicker, I've found. But when you say learn deeper with larger companies, I'm not sure I agree fully, just because with smaller, for example, with Luma, you're doing things such as you're involved in the quoting, or you're involved in the website stuff or logo stuff, and things that you wouldn't necessarily be exposed to in larger companies, because they'd have set designers for these specific roles, or not even designers. They'd have, a finance department or things like that. So I feel like you get an experience of the entire, not just design process, but the business process as well. No worries, Vish.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a good question. I think in large companies, and comparing to small, though, is that probably one of the biggest point you made there is probably around the financing of it all. Because I think when you're in a smaller company, you're probably more exposed to it, and maybe in a larger agency you're relatively shielded from that responsibility. But a question I've got for you is, how do you deal with a client that just wants something in silver?
In silver?
Yeah. Well, how do you deal? Because you're dealing with the Dragon's Den of the world, the Dragon's Den people of the world, aren't you? So how do you deal with awkward clients? Because I'm sure large agencies experience awkward clients, but in a different way.
I think the one thing that's I guess quite relevant to how Luma operates is, because we're so transparent with what we say, or what we communicate with clients, we don't really get that awkward kind of that awkward conversation of like, who's going to show their cards first, almost. Because if someone wants something done that we can't do, we just say, I'm sorry, we can't do this, but this company does it. Would you want to go and go to them? Or say if we don't have the scope to do something, take something on that's too large for us, we can always recommend another company. And it's the same with larger companies. If they've got a client that is just too small for them, they will often pass them over to us. But yeah, I think the whole kind of transparency and honesty is quite a big thing. And I'm not sure if that's relevant, it being a small or large company. Again, it goes back to the type of people you're working with. I know that some companies that colleagues I've worked for, they're not as transparent with the clients, and you can kind of see how much of a knock-on effect that has. Certainly places in, like I previously worked for, where it's the transparency isn't quite there, and you can kind of see it like develop into something that could have been neutralized if you were just straight up with the client from the offset.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and we actually, again, shameless podcast plug, we start to really delve into that topic with an episode we had with someone called Julie, I think, Lambretson, and she was working for a medical company called Convatec, and we basically got her to rant about design agencies and about how some of them work, and because it's medical, she'll deal with quite a lot of the bigger kind of agencies, and it'd be really interesting to see as these little freelancers pop up, maybe the kind of the whole dynamic will change, and there'll be I definitely know there's a greater impact on agencies really trying to push their own IP.
Yes.
So that maybe that's something that I don't know if you can do more in a small agency or a large agency, but definitely a real push in developing their own IP. That's a big thing that I've certainly noticed recently. Connor's put, is there such thing as a Goldilocks size company, and how would you describe it? What's this kind of ideal kind of client, really? I suppose someone with money, I think, would be a good start, wouldn't it?
I think it's one of those things. I mean, we're all designers, and we all like to complain about stuff all the time. Like nothing's ever. It's that whole grass is always greener on the other side conundrum, isn't it? Like at a smaller company, I think that's why when we're talking, Brad, you and I, about this talk, it's quite interesting to kind of see the pros and cons of working at a larger or smaller company. In terms of a mid ground, it's really difficult to say, because I guess it's like the previous companies I've worked for, where there have been 20 or 30, I guess that's not like a huge company. I'd say that's more of a mid ground. But when I'm comparing it to a company like Luma, then that seems a lot larger. So I think there's clear kind of benefits and disadvantages of both, and you've got to size up exactly the type of place you'd want to work for. So for example, where I talked about variety of projects, people don't always like that, and that goes back to what you were saying about in-house versus agency.
I think people just gravitate to one or the other, don't they? And
I think so.
As your career evolves, you'll find out which is best. You know, some people like working in smaller agencies.
Yes.
And then it starts to become larger, and it starts to feel like maybe actually now's the time for me to move on, start something else. Or so there probably isn't really like a Goldilocks size. It's just a Goldilocks size thing in your own mind of what it is that you want to do.
Yeah.
But the only way you're going to know that is by experiencing both things, and the same applies to in-house as well.
Yeah.
But don't be put off just by one experience that you've had within that.
Yeah.
So you could work in some small agencies and it would be an absolute nightmare for you, but you might work with someone else and it might be your absolute dream job. But as your career evolves, you'll probably eventually kind of gravitate more towards one than the other. Question here from Mo. Great insights, both Vish and Hans. Do you feel there is a different level of ownership between large or small agencies, or no difference since it's always for a client? And as someone that works for a small agency, I'll put a spin on that question.
Mhm.
Do you have, if you was to work for a big player right now, Hans, do you feel like because you're working in a company of 4,
Yeah.
there's a lot more ownership? You know, you feel a greater sense of much responsibility,
Yes.
pressure in a weird. You're not just here's some work, go get on with it.
Yeah, exactly. I
It's a bit deeper than that.
definitely agree with that. Smaller agency, like I was saying, we often take on entire projects ourselves, and I think it's quite a clever move in a small agency to have designers do that, because it does give you this this sense of responsibility. So if you booked a holiday or something and you have a deadline, you'll feel compelled to switch that holiday, because it's your responsibility, you feel. And whereas I feel if you are working with a lot more other people, you have that kind of safety net, almost like, oh, it's not gonna matter, like I'm just one person in this machine, so if I drop out, it's not going to make a huge difference. I think that's kind of the mindset that a lot of people would have.
Yeah, we've got a point from Cara. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Don't have a question, but just wanted to say thank you for breaking down the differences really nicely. Just recently applied to work at a smaller company and was sort of second guessing myself of whether or not it was a good choice. Thanks for the breakdown. It was really helpful. And I suppose best of luck with your application as well.
Yeah.
That's the main message. I'm sure other people in here would echo that.
Yes.
And to anyone that's here that maybe has got an interview next week, or they're waiting to hear back from feedback, or they've just applied to a dream job, seriously, best of luck from, and I'm sure everyone here would echo that.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone wants to, like you were saying, Brad, if anyone wants to chat like after this, you know, I'm easy to get hold of, so I'd be happy to.
Yeah, and we've got nothing else to do, have we?
Yeah, exactly. Although you did say that you got that new Xbox the other day.
Yeah,
so.
the Xbox is here. Storage is a nightmare on that thing. It really, really is. Guys, I just want to say thank you everyone that came today. Really appreciate it. Just super sorry about the whole Logitech nightmare that happened earlier, and the fact that it's not on YouTube, but it will be. Hans, Vish, what would be great if you could just send me like a PDF version of your kind of slides. That would be super cool if you could do that.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I'll try and get this on YouTube as soon as I can, and send a few apology messages to people who are hoping that their Friday evening was going to be spent with us. But yeah, thanks to everyone that's come. I don't know whether there'll be one before the new year. The next episode on the podcast is with the chief design guys down at Arrival. If you don't know who Arrival are, then give it a quick Google, and it's not the film Amy Adams. It's a little bit more interesting than that. I'm just waiting for approval on that, so that should be up hopefully soon. And that's super cool. Honestly, you should watch that. And then we're filming a Christmas special of the pod, which I think is like the first week of December, and we're going to go through the survey results. If you haven't filled out the survey, then there's a link to it somewhere. I'll try and find it out. But we're going to go through that, and off the back of that, we've put together some salary guides. So we've basically asked. We haven't asked people what they're earning, but we've just asked for a general kind of insight and ranges and that kind of thing. And what we're going to do is we're going to package that together, and we're going to send it out to everyone to say that just to make sure. Just to make the amount of messages I get on LinkedIn was like, Brad, can I just have a quick chat with you? I'm going for a salary review, but I don't know whether I'm parable to market, or maybe I should earn a little bit more. And I really want to just give people that information and make sure that it also really challenges us in terms of this kind of equal pay as well across different genders. It's it's an issue I've certainly experienced over the years in dealing with clients, and we want to not necessarily expose that, but we want to give as much information to people as possible in terms of what salaries they should be earning against certain locations. That will be completely free of charge. That will be a PDF. We'll kind of smash it all across to you, and yeah, more on the Patreon stuff maybe over the next couple of months or so. But most importantly, just stay safe, I guess, everyone. and stay healthy, and we will talk again, I'm sure. So thanks everyone, and look after